Our next speaker is Bartosz Wesół. He's from the University of Warsaw, PhD student in philosophy, and his interests include Kant's philosophy, pragmatism, and the philosophical foundations of Christian theology. And one of the authors that Bartosz is dealing with is Edith Stein. So, Bartosz, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. The title of my talk is Pragmatist Christian Philosophy Beyond Naturalism. And I have to admit I had some troubles when preparing this talk, because the thing is that only after I wrote the abstract about arguing that pragmatism is independent of naturalism, I discovered that someone has already done it. And I found out that the American scholar before I mentioned, Michael Slater from Georgetown University, in his book Pragmatism and the Philosophy of Religion, among other things, he does also argue for this independence of pragmatism of naturalism. On the other hand, before I discovered his book, I already started to work on the subject. I took slightly different approach to the issue, and so today I will proceed according to what I wrote in my abstract, and I will try to somehow present it as let's say, a dialogue between me and Slater. And my general claim is that pragmatism is independent of a commitment to naturalism, even though many of the influential pragmatists were indeed naturalists. And I wrote about Rorty here, that he's one of the examples, but now I will have to somehow maybe change my mind. But before Rorty, his master, one of the founding fathers of pragmatism, John Dewey, and also, for instance, Wilfrid Sellars and Quine. These are the examples of pragmatists who were naturalists. And additionally, I will try to show that pragmatism can give a good inspiration for Christian philosophy in how to deal with contemporary naturalism. And I will start by discussing the notions of naturalism and pragmatism, and then I will present chosen features of the two founding fathers of pragmatism, so Charles Sanders Peirce and William James, to show that their version of pragmatism is not non-naturalistic. And I will finish by saying a few words about pragmatic Christian philosophy and its possible benefits. At the beginning, I wanted to say just a few words about a pragmatist approach or pragmatist way of looking at philosophical problems. And especially when discussing such loaded metaphysical concepts like naturalism, pragmatism would focus on the function that a concept plays within a certain discourse. But it's important to say that is not to say that pragmatist would reduce the meaning of the concept to its function. Some pragmatists maybe would actually want to do it, but I think it's rather an extreme position. But let's say a minimal thing a pragmatist wants to acknowledge, want to argue, and want us to acknowledge is that the function of the concept, so how it works, tells us something significant about its meaning. And so when we look at the concept of naturalism, we first, of course, see, as also Oscar mentioned, that it is incredibly difficult to define it in a satisfying way. But I think pragmatist and this functional approach can be of help. And so we can first observe that the term naturalism works analogously to other concepts like physicalism and materialism, which can be described as statements that only what is physical or only what is material or natural exists. Of course, it's only a metaphysical sort of naturalism, and Professor Gasser yesterday talked about different types of naturalism, but I want to focus on the metaphysical one here. And yeah, with this very short definition, for example, of naturalism, that only what is natural exists, and analogously to physicalism and materialism, we have the same function of the concepts like nature, the physical, the material. And what is this function? And I believe generally it is a reductive and exclusive function. So to say that only what is natural exists, or only what is physical exists, and therefore excluding things that supposed to be non-physical or non-natural. And also Michael Slater takes this approach in defining naturalism. He defines it negatively as follows. Here I quote, "Naturalism is the view that nothing of a supernatural kind exists." So supernatural beings such as God, supernatural realities or places such as heaven, supernatural entities or properties of entities such as souls, and so on. Another important pragmatic point of Slater that I want to follow is his adaptation of William James' catchy notion of overbelief. And Slater says that naturalism is an overbelief. So a belief which is of most generality and is a part of one's worldview. And overbeliefs don't work like other beliefs. They can't be justified fully. Rather, they are a part of the very basis for justifying other beliefs. They are a part of the, let's say, transcendental structure of one's worldview, rather than expression of certain facts inside the world. And here, now let me turn to pragmatism and say a few general points what pragmatism is. Because here, and this is the approach I took to try to boil down or to find the founding stone of pragmatism, and I think most scholars would agree that it is the pragmatic maxim, which was introduced by Peirce in his famous paper, "How to Make Our Ideas Clear." And here I quote, "Consider what effects that might conceivably have practical bearings we conceive the object of our conceptions to have. Then our conception of these effects is the whole of our conception of the object." End of quote. Maybe it's not so clear because he shuffles with these few concepts. But to simplify it, I think we can say that our concepts should come from analyzing the practical bearings, the effects of the objects of our concepts. And I think that depending on how we interpret this maxim and its role determines what kind of pragmatists we become, and moreover, whether we are inclined to be naturalists or no. And I think in the history of development of the pragmatic tradition of pragmatism, I think really you can trace back this other kinds of pragmatism to other interpretations of this maxim. And so let me start with saying how Peirce himself understood the maxim. On the one hand, which could provide an inclination towards naturalism, when he talked about the conceivable practical bearings, he thought about empirical effects of the objects. Let's say, in general, a possible experience, this conceivable practical bearings. On the other hand, he took the maxim to be only a methodological principle, which answers the title question of his article, how to make our ideas clear. And so not the question what is real or how we should determine what counts as real and what doesn't. And I think here we can spot a very important confusion that I think Dewey and James didn't understand about Peirce's approach and undertook another path, is that they took this principle to be not only methodological but also ontological. And so they reduced, of course, maybe unconsciously, but they would, at some points, they would reduce reality or what the objects are, and not only our conceptions of the objects, they would reduce it to their practical effects. And another thing, so one confusion is about the role of this principle, whether it is methodological or ontological. And another thing, which is, as far as I know, it's not so, the interpretation is not so much discussed in the literature, about this practical effects, because Peirce himself thought about the empirical effects, but I think in general we can very broadly interpret this maxim, and for example think about, and I really think that this shows us the methodology of our inquiry. For example, in mathematics, when we try to make a concept as clear as possible and try to figure out what the concept is, we imagine certain possible situations. For example, when we, I don't know, investigate a mathematical function, we put different possible, how to say it, different possible, I don't know, numbers inside as variables and so on. And just by imagining how the object of this conception, how it would react to these changes in the circumstances that we put it in, even in possible situations, it shows us, it clarifies what the concept, our concept of the object is. But sorry, maybe it's not so clear now. Let me go further. And another thing about Peirce himself, he considered himself a scholastic realist, and along the lines of Duns Scotus realism concerning universals. And I don't want to go in details here, but just to say that for Peirce himself, this pragmatist approach at all didn't incline the naturalistic approach, for example, to I don't know, universals, and Peirce accepted many of the his ontology was very broad, and another important notion is that in his understanding of experience, so also in the practical bearings and effects of the objects, he followed Kant in saying that especially scientific experience is never immediate and pure. It is always penetrated by a universal or normative element of rules and principles, which he counted as real, according to his scholastic realist account. So from very scientific position, Peirce not only accepted the existence of universals, but also by developing his theory of the logics of scientific inquiry, so his notion of abduction, and which was then called inference to the best explanation. He even developed what he called a neglected argument for existence of God. So from his purely scientific position, he arrived at the conclusion that we should, in order to make our scientific inquiry as successful as possible, we should suppose the existence of God, so a supernatural being par excellence. I don't know how much time do I have left. Okay, sorry. So let me now say something briefly about William James. As another example of a pragmatist thinker who wasn't a naturalist. And I mentioned that Slater adopts the James notion of overbelief. And I think that from James' perspective, naturalism is an overbelief, and actually an overbelief that is more dogmatic than a non-naturalistic approach or non-naturalistic account. I think this is how we can interpret his famous lecture, The Will to Believe, where he argues for rationality of religious belief. And my interpretation of this paper is somewhat Kantian, that at first James tried to make a critique of scientific, or not maybe scientific, but naturalistic position. So critique and limiting the scientific inquiry to make room for faith, and to then justify faith or justify the rationality of religious beliefs on the practical grounds. So, and I think it is an example of somewhat Kantian scheme of first the critique of the theoretical, then making room for the practical. Maybe just another thing about James and his take on religious experience. He wrote this very also influential book, let's say from psychological perspective, The Varieties of Religious Experience. And from this empiricistic and psychological point of view, he tried to analyze the religious phenomenon of religious experiences. And here he argues that in order to make justice in explaining or really being truthful to the experience itself, even from purely empiricistic stance, we should accept that there is more than pure. There is more than we can explain by natural sciences. So experience itself, religious experience. He analyzed many different interesting examples of such. He argued that experience itself forces us to broaden our ontology, so to say. So to conclude now, what I wanted to say, to argue, is that pragmatism itself is independent of naturalism, and so I presented especially the case of Peirce and James, and also I tried to analyze the most important fundament of pragmatist tradition, so the pragmatic maxim, and show how its interpretation can be non-naturalistic. And with Peirce and James, I think the crucial points I wanted to make is that and why we can use pragmatism in today's contemporary debate to argue against naturalism is that Peirce's philosophy shows that in order to scientific inquiry to operate, we should not adopt naturalistic position and reduce reality to only natural entities. And from James, I think we can take the claim that first, naturalism is an overbelief, so a claim that is not discovered by science itself, but is rather a vision or a worldview which science presupposes. So not something discovered, but presupposed, and that naturalism is in its reduction of reality to certain entities and to one methodology, it is more dogmatic than a non-naturalistic position which is open to other kinds of experiences. Okay, thank you.